we're expecting to have several hundred investors there. So if you're a founder that wants to get the next funding round, we want to introduce your next investor to you. And the pitch contest is the great place for that.
Do you have something inside? Why Tokyo for working in tech?
That's an interesting question, because people are saying that it's nice that in Japan things work. There's like no riots. It's kind of safe. This is people are also take care of each other and they take care of you as well. So I think there's a lot of people now who kind of see the value of the society in Japan recently. We are currently working on building also the best startup industry opportunities also in the world here to Tokyo.
Hi, Antti. Thank you so much for attending this interview today. It's our second time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be back.
Please introduce about yourself, Antti. What do you do in Tokyo?
Sure. So my name is Antti. I'm originally from Finland, but I've been in Tokyo now for 11 years now. I organize an event called Takeoff Tokyo, which is building internationally ambitious startup ecosystem to Japan and Tokyo. And what we want to create is the next generation Toyotas and Sonys of Japan. And we organize most of the contents in English. And it's a place where not only Japanese startup community but also international community participates. So I'm organizing that.
I see. So you started the Takeoff Tokyo conference from 2023?
Yeah. So we started it in 2023 spring, and Corona had ended, and after Corona, we wanted to build this place for internationally ambitious founders. So that's how we started it.
So fun fact, I knew him. So he is great biker. He does biking around Shibuya. He's super city boy, right?
Yeah, I mean, like a bicycle gets you to your next place or next meeting. It gets you there faster than a train or a taxi usually. So
I agree with you. And thanks to biking, we don't need to touch phone, kind of a digital detox. And also we can make a good shape, right?
Yes, exactly. 3 birds with 1 stone.
Okay, Antti, tell us about kind of a trigger situation. Why did you feel, I have to start startup conference in Tokyo? Do you remember?
Yeah, of course. So after being here for many years, I've seen that there's a lot of great things in Japan. It's a very well-working society. It's safe. There's food tastes good. The people are nice, and crime rate is low. And then I've noticed that a lot of people have been thinking like, what's the future and where does future growth and future happiness come from? So yeah, happiness and growth comes from basically building businesses that grow also outside of the country. So we noticed that there's a lot of startups already inside Japan, but we wanted to build a place where founder community here can dream bigger and build bigger. So that's why we started the conference.
Thank you so much. Thanks to last year, Takeoff Tokyo 2024, I got opportunity to do volunteer for your team. It was game-changing for me, so appreciate. Thanks to this volunteer opportunity, I could talk with you, Ayaka-san, Yoshimi-san, and also many guest speakers from abroad. And then, super interesting. That's why I could start interview podcast seriously. So appreciate. So let's talk about your reflection over 2024.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for volunteering, by the way. We wouldn't have been able to do the event without many great people like you. And so 2024 was the second year of Takeoff Tokyo. First time we just did it and we kind of got it started. Second year we were able to grow it to larger size. We almost tripled the venue or the number of people. It went from 800 to 2,000. And we also we're able to bring a lot of more international visitors to the event. What we want to create is exactly what you mentioned, so that there's volunteers, but all the other participants as well get lots of exciting opportunities. I want to see that many people can meet people that they wouldn't otherwise meet, and then it leads to new careers, new growth in companies. Maybe you meet an investor you wouldn't have otherwise met. Just think bigger. I think that kind of energy and excitement is what creates growth. But 2024 was a good year, and right now 2025 is looking like it's going to be an even better year.
Oh, okay. So last year already over 2,000 participants. Amazing. And then so this is your third year. So what is kind of different or improving compared to last year?
So when we started in the beginning, it was not a one-off, but it was kind of unsure where it's going to go. It was the first time we try it. So the kind of foundation and the kind of culture around this is getting a little bit stronger. We have a stronger team. We have actually already, it's the third team, so it means that there's kind of generations, or kind of there's more experience in the team and the community. Actually, only today I got messages from 3 different people who messaged me that they want to join us this year. And I remember in the beginning that never happened. So there's more and more people who are slowly getting interested in building these globally ambitious companies.
Amazing. So I really enjoyed the panel talk last year and also pitch contest, right? Yeah. So this year also kind of similar style. Yeah,
so we're continuing the panel stage and the pitch stage. We're increasing the number of speakers. The pitch stage is more for where you get to see up and coming more fresh companies or fresh talent. You see what the next generation of entrepreneurs is doing, and panel stage has more experienced entrepreneurs sharing their wisdom. So I think those 2 elements are needed this year, and we want to do it bigger and better.
I see. So how do you find these experienced founders from all over the world?
So it's, for example, today I had lunch with a venture capitalist, and they had invested into 3 different companies that were very interesting for our stage. We try to put on the panel stage, companies that have raised at least $10 million funding. So the funding itself is not the most important thing, but it kind of it's kind of like a sign that they can't be doing everything wrong, because if we do that, if we bring companies that have been able to already get somewhere, then other founders want to hear their opinion and then their advice. So 2025 we're doing bigger and better. We kind of want to make this Takeoff Tokyo thing slowly into the mainstream. Just 2 years ago started it. It was nowhere yet, but this year we're trying to make it so that everybody knows about it in Japan, but also outside. Let's see how far we get. There needs to be a reason that brings all the best founders and investors to Tokyo every year. So we want to build that.
I see. Thank you. So do you still open application for potential guest speakers or who want to do pitch? Do you still have space?
Yeah, so we do have some space. The pitch contest is we're going to put at least 50 companies on stage. We're now looking if we could increase it even larger than that. Last year we had 50, so at least the same. We're expecting to have several hundred investors there. So if you're a founder that wants to get the next funding round, not everybody needs it, but many do. We want to introduce your next investor to you, and the pitch contest is the great place for that. Panel stage, the veteran entrepreneur stage, is also starting to fill up. There's still some space there, but we're currently have 10 weeks before the event. We have 3 times more registration than last year at this point.
Amazing. And do you still looking for volunteer people?
Yes. Anyone who wants to get into startups, it's a good opportunity to learn English if you're Japanese. So it's also a great opportunity to learn Japanese if you're non-Japanese and just get into startups. So I think we calculated this year we need almost 200 volunteers. So because the venue is a little bit bigger than last year.
Really? Amazing. Volunteering for tech event conference is so great opportunity. I highly recommend because of sometimes conference ticket is so expensive. We cannot afford. But thanks to volunteer, of course we have to preparation. But we could talk with all organizers. We could communicate with all volunteer team members. It's super fun. It's kind of a, what can I say, matsuri. What can I say in English? Festival, right?
Festival,
Yeah, and then we could talk with guest speakers. Highly recommend.
Yeah, nothing to add there. Like you said it perfectly, and like you volunteered last year, so you actually know how it was better than me. I'm just hoping it was a great experience, but it sounds like it was. We a lot of the volunteers who join us, they join us to find their next career or next kind of, they want like friends or like not only not friends, but kind of like professional kind of network as well. And some of them end up becoming friends as well. So it's a great place for anybody who wants to figure out their next move in startups.
Yeah, you are right. And also in Tokyo, for example, here is the Shibuya area. There are tons of tourists, right? So Tokyo is a kind of a most popular tourist place. But many people ask me, hey, Kaori, traveling to Tokyo is super fun, but why many people are moving to Tokyo and then doing tech job or starting to their company? So do you have something secret? They asked me. So do you have something insights? Why Tokyo for working in tech?
That's an interesting question, because during Corona there's suddenly so many people from Silicon Valley and actually Europe who are coming to Japan, and people are saying that it's nice that in Japan things work. There's like no riots. It's kind of safe. The society seems to work in a nice way, and the people are also take care of each other, and they take care of you as well. So I think there's a lot of people now who kind of see the value of the society in Japan recently. We are currently working on building also the best startup industry opportunities also in the world here to Tokyo.
Yeah, and I think as a foreigner, getting work visa in the States kind of hard, but maybe Japan is every year hurdle is low, right? So digital nomad visa or startup visa, many choice, correct?
Yeah, it's not easy, but the one thing that is good in Japan is that if you have everything in the list, it's usually quite straightforward. There's not so many surprises in my experience. Like I've seen in some other countries, it can sometimes be a completely different processing time. It might be, they made me wait like a lot longer, or there was some documents that were unexpected. It's not easy, but it seems like quite, if you just do what's required in the list, it's usually very straightforward.
I see. Thank you. So, and my personal question, Antti, you are a entrepreneur and then doing big conference every year and then becoming a growing, fostering big startup community in Japan. So, don't you make your accelerator or your fund? What do you think?
So there's many ways how I could use this kind of momentum. There's actually quite many people who've asked me to join their fund or do this accelerator. I haven't fully decided what I'm going to do through this, but if there's a way for me to build the next Toyota, that's something that I would be the most interested in. But let's see. You never know, and also to build something legendary like that, you need also quite a lot of luck. But one thing I'm trying to do with organizing this conference is I'm trying to maximize my luck. A lot of interesting opportunities come to me because of this kind of organizing.
Amazing. Okay, so if you want to attend Takeoff Tokyo 2025, or if you want to do pitch or become a volunteer or guest speaker, please check Takeoff Tokyo 2025 website and also to check Antti's LinkedIn. Correct?
LinkedIn or any other social media. Facebook is big in Japan, but yeah, LinkedIn I guess is biggest for people around the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Antti. Bye bye.
Thank you.
The 3 key takeaways from a conversation with Antti today. 1. Building an internationally ambitious startup ecosystem in Tokyo. Antti launched the Takeoff Tokyo in 2023 to foster a globally minded startup community in Japan. The event has grown significantly, driving its attendance to over 2,000 participants in its second year. It provides a platform for founders, investors, and international participants to connect, share ideas, and collaborate. For instance, participants can meet potential investors and partners, as illustrated by Antti's example of venture capitalists introducing innovative companies for panel discussions. 2. Volunteering as a gateway to startup and networking. Volunteering at the event like Takeoff Tokyo offers a cost-effective way to gain insights into the tech industry, build a professional network, and explore career opportunities. For me, the volunteer experience was game-changing, allowing me to interact with organizers and guest speakers, ultimately inspiring me to launch a podcast. Yes, it was my origin. Antti emphasized that many volunteers find new careers or build meaningful professional relationships through these opportunities. 3. A clear vision, building the next legendary tech companies. Antti's long-term goal is to create the next Toyota or legendary tech companies from Tokyo. By organizing Takeoff Tokyo, he is paving the way for founders to dream bigger and aim higher. For instance, the event prioritizes showcasing startups that have raised significant funding and connect founders with hundreds of investors. Antti believes that these interactions and the opportunities generated through the conference will create a foundation for Tokyo to produce globally renewed companies. Okay, thank you so much for listening to our conversation today. We hope today's episode will help your future and career. Okay, if you like our episode, please subscribe it and give you a like. Okay, thank you. またね。バイバイ。